A winter storm swallowed the road into Silverpine, and one forgotten Navy SEAL fell beside a pine tree. His German shepherd, Rune, stood between him and every passing headlight that refused to stop. Then an old blacksmith saw them in the snow and opened the door to a forge still burning in the dark. But inside that warm little town, Grant Ashby found more than shelter. He found papers that said he had received help he never got, and a dog who remembered what he had tried to forget. Before the truth could ring again, Silverpine would have to dig through snow, old records, and one man's broken faith. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from. Leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Tales reach 5,000 subscribers. By daylight, Silverpine looked almost too gentle to be real. The old mining town sat folded between the Colorado mountains, its roofs softened by winter snow, its pine ridges shining beneath the pale sun like rows of silver spears. Smoke rose from stone chimneys in blue ribbons. Porch lights glowed even before evening, warm and patient, as if the houses had learned long ago that winter respected no clock. From a distance, Silverpine seemed like the kind of place where broken things might be forgiven. But that night, the town did not welcome Grant Ashby with light. It welcomed him with hail. The first stone struck the windshield of his old pickup like thrown gravel. Then more came, faster and harder, rattling across the hood, bouncing off the cracked side mirrors, drumming against the roof until the whole truck sounded hollow. The wipers dragged slush and ice in tired half-moons across the glass. Beyond the headlights, the forest road twisted between black pines and white banks of snow, disappearing and reappearing like a trail in an old myth. Grant kept both hands on the wheel. He was 49, tall, broad-shouldered, built with the hard economy of a man, shaped by years of discipline and bad weather. His navy blue military T-shirt clung beneath an old field jacket, the fabric worn thin at the collar, but still fitted over a solid chest and arms that had not forgotten work. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with a strong jaw and gray-blue eyes set deep beneath a brow that seemed carved for silence. His undercut hair, neat even now, carried silver at the temples. He looked like a man who had once known exactly where to stand when the world became chaos. Now he was not sure where he belonged at all. In the passenger seat, Rune lifted his head. The German shepherd was 6 years old, large and steady, with a black saddle over a golden body and a narrow flame-colored streak running between his eyes. His left ear held a small notch near the edge, an old mark from another hard season. His amber eyes reflected the dashboard lights without blinking. "You don't like it either," Grant muttered. Rune answered with a low breath through his nose, not quite a sigh, not quite agreement. He had always done that, listened as if words were less important than the weight behind them. Grant glanced toward the glove box, then down to the plastic storage bin wedged under the passenger seat. It was gray, cracked along one corner, and held the remains of a life that had been reduced to forms, notices, stamped envelopes, and copies of copies. VA paperwork, medical records, fire recovery letters, a few photographs saved by accident rather than care. 2 years ago, Grant had rented a cabin outside Silverpine after leaving the teams. He had wanted distance, not drama, not reinvention, not some grand new beginning. Just distance. He had chosen the edge of town because it was quiet enough for a man to hear snowfall and far enough from Denver that nobody asked too many questions. Then the wildfire came. It ran through the ridges like an ancient beast waking hungry. Half the town burned. Grant's cabin went with it. Most of his papers vanished. Rune had been taken through an animal evacuation shelter while Grant was in Denver for medical evaluations he barely remembered now. Hallways, fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the taste of vending machine coffee, a doctor saying something about documentation and service connection and coding errors. After that, the letters began. First, his benefits file had been coded wrong. Then it had been corrected, reopened, and coded wrong again. The local recovery assistants after the fire went somewhere else, into some county maze of signatures, case numbers, missing attachments, and polite voices that sounded helpful until nothing changed. Every call ended with a new number to call. Every number ended with another hold line. Every letter looked official enough to ruin a week and vague enough to solve nothing. Eventually, Grant stopped opening them. A man could take only so many paper cuts to the soul before he quit bleeding where anyone could see. So he drove, slept in the truck, worked odd repairs when he needed gas, kept Rune fed better than he fed himself. He told himself he was not running. He was simply refusing to stand in line for people who had already misplaced him twice. The truck gave a hard cough. Grant felt it through the steering column before he heard it. The engine stumbled, caught, stumbled again. A warning light glowed on the dash like a small red eye. "No," he said. The truck disagreed. Another cough, then a long shudder. Grant guided it toward the shoulder, tires crunching over frozen slush. The forest leaned close on both sides. The road was narrow here, hemmed by snowbanks and dark trees. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curve and the weather, Silverpine slept under its soft white roofs. The engine died. For a moment, the only sound was hail. Grant sat still, jaw tight, both hands locked on the wheel. Rune stood in the passenger footwell, shoulders tense, ears forward. "It's fine," Grant said. The words sounded foolish the second they left his mouth. He pulled on his gloves and stepped out. Cold hit him like a verdict. Hail snapped against his jacket, stung his face, skittered under his collar. He raised the hood and leaned into the engine bay, though the beam of his flashlight shook so badly he could barely see what he was looking at. He knew machines. Not perfectly, but enough. He had kept this truck moving long after any sensible man would have sold it for parts. Tonight, even the truck seemed tired of surviving. His fingers fumbled at a cable. The metal was slick. His breath came sharp. He had not eaten enough that day, had not slept more than a few hours at a time for too many nights. His body, once an obedient instrument, had become a committee of old injuries voting against him one by one. Behind him, Rune gave a short bark. Grant turned. Headlights appeared around the bend. For a second, the road filled with white glare. Grant raised one arm, not high, not desperate, just enough to be seen. The car slowed. Rune stepped between Grant and the road. Then the car moved around them and drove on. Its taillights vanished into the storm like two red sparks swallowed by a giant. Grant lowered his arm. A strange little laugh escaped him. No humor in it, just air with nowhere better to go. "Can't blame them," he said, though he did. Not the driver, maybe. Not exactly. He blamed the shape of things. The way people learned to look away because stopping cost too much. The way a man in trouble became a hazard to avoid, a delay, a story someone else could tell later with a shake of the head. He tried the engine again. Nothing. He returned to the hood. His left knee throbbed. His shoulders had begun to shake, and not only from the cold. Rune pressed close to his leg, warm and solid, but Grant waved him back. "I've got it." Rune did not move. "Back." The dog held his ground. Grant looked down at him, and something in that stubborn golden-black face nearly broke the last thin wire holding him upright. "Don't," Grant whispered. It was not clear whether he was speaking to Rune, the storm, his own body, or the box of papers under the seat. Perhaps all of them. Another set of headlights came, then another. One truck slowed, its tires hissing over slush. Grant saw the shadow of a driver lean toward the windshield. Rune stood squarely in the road shoulder, head lowered, not threatening without reason, but warning the world that this man was not abandoned property. The truck drove on. The hail thickened. Grant shut the hood harder than he meant to. The sound cracked through the trees. He took 3 steps toward the driver's door, missed his footing on the icy edge of the shoulder, and caught himself against a pine trunk. The bark scraped his glove. Snow dropped from the branches onto his shoulders. For a moment, he stayed there, bent forward, one hand against the tree. The forest around him went soft at the edges. He thought of the cabin he had lost 2 years ago, not because it had been much, but because it had been his. A place with a crooked porch, a coffee pot that burned everything, and a corner where Rune slept with one ear always turned toward the door. He thought of the letters he had stopped opening. He thought of a woman at a desk saying, "Sir, I understand your frustration," in a voice that understood nothing and risked nothing. Rune whined once. Grant tried to straighten. His body refused. He sank down beside the pine, one knee in the snow, then the other. Cold pushed through his jeans. The hail struck the branches overhead and fell around him in bright little beads. Rune moved instantly. The German shepherd planted himself in front of Grant, facing the road. His wet fur stood along his neck. His ears rose high. A low growl built in his chest, not wild, not panicked, but ancient in its certainty. Grant wanted to tell him to stop, to get back in the truck, to stay warm. No words came. Headlights washed over them again. Rune stepped forward, broad body blocking the view of Grant slumped against the tree. The vehicle did not stop. Another passed after it. Then the road went dark. Time loosened. Grant heard hail, his own uneven breath, Rune's growl, the far-off groan of trees in the wind. Then came a different engine, older, rougher, slower. A pickup rounded the bend, painted a faded moss green, its left headlight dimmer than the right. It did not glide past like the others. It braked with a complaining squeal and stopped crooked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking amber through the storm. The driver's door opened. An old man climbed down. He was not tall, but he carried himself with the dense weight of iron. A heavy coat hung from his shoulders, dark with wet and smudged with soot around the cuffs. A wool cap sat low over thick white hair. His face was lined deeply, weathered by heat as much as cold, and his hands were broad, scarred, and steady. He took one look at Rune and did not come closer. Instead, he lowered himself slowly into a crouch, knees cracking loud enough that even the storm seemed to hear. "Well," the old man said, voice rough as a file over metal. "You're a serious fellow," Rune growled. The old man nodded, as if this were a fair point in a negotiation. "Can't argue with that." Grant forced his eyes open wider. The man's outline swayed in the blur of hail and headlights. "Dog," Grant managed. "Don't—" "I'm not touching your dog," the old man said. "Not unless he writes me a permission slip, and he does not look like a dog who signs quickly." Under any other sky, Grant might have laughed. Rune's growl lowered, but he did not step aside. The old man looked at him, not over him, not around him. Straight at him, as though speaking to a guard at the gate of a fallen kingdom. "All right, sentry," he said softly. "I'm not here to steal your king." Something shifted. Rune's ears remained sharp, his body still braced. But the growl faded into silence. He turned his head just enough to look back at Grant, then at the old man again. The old man took that as permission to move 1 inch closer. "My name's Amos Hardy," he said, though Grant had not asked. "Blacksmith, last one dumb enough to keep a forge lit in Silverpine." Grant tried to answer, failed. Amos looked him over once, not with pity, not with alarm, but with the practical eye of a man judging whether a cracked hinge could still bear weight. "You picked a poor night for camping," Grant's mouth twitched. "Truck died." "Most things do eventually. Trick is catching them before they make a religion of it." Amos stood with effort, went to his pickup, and returned with a wool blanket. He did not fling it over Grant. He held it out where Rune could smell it first. Rune sniffed. Once, twice. Then he stepped half a pace aside. "Much obliged," Amos told him. Between the old man's stubborn strength and Grant's last scraps of cooperation, they got him upright. The world tilted. Rune pressed against Grant's leg, anchoring him. Amos opened the passenger side of the moss-green pickup and cleared away a coil of chain, 2 iron hooks, and a paper bag that smelled faintly of burned coffee. Grant looked back toward his own truck. "The papers," he said. Amos followed his gaze. "What papers?" Grant tried to point. "Under the seat." Amos studied him for half a second. Then, without comment, he went to the dead truck, opened the passenger door, and pulled out the cracked gray storage bin. Rune watched every movement like a priest guarding a relic. When Amos set the bin in the back of his pickup, Rune finally jumped in after it. Not beside Grant, beside the papers. Grant saw that before his vision blurred again. For some reason, that hurt more than the cold. The dog had not guarded the documents because they were useful. Rune had guarded them because Grant had tried so hard to throw away everything connected to his own name. Amos drove slowly. The road into Silverpine wound beneath white-laden pines and past dark cabins tucked back from the road. A few windows glowed gold. Grant saw them through half-closed eyes, each light a small refusal against the storm. The town appeared by degrees, a wooden sign rimmed with ice, a closed feed store, the low roof line of a diner, the black skeleton of an old mine structure beyond the houses. Then the forge. It stood at the edge of town, squat and broad, built of dark timber and stone, with a chimney breathing smoke into the hail. Warm orange light seeped through the windows. A bell hung above the door, blackened and cracked, its shape strange in the storm. Amos helped Grant inside. Heat wrapped around him. The forge smelled of coal, hot iron, dry pine, leather, old tools, and coffee that had clearly lost a war against good taste. The space was cluttered but orderly. Hammers along one wall, tongs hanging from hooks, horseshoes stacked beside a workbench, iron rods leaning like sleeping spears. In the center, the forge glowed red, alive and watchful. Rune entered behind them, carrying himself with suspicion until he had inspected every corner he could see. Only then did he return to Grant's side. Amos pointed toward a cot near the stove. "Down!" Grant almost objected. His body made the decision for him. He lay back under the blanket, boots still on, one arm hanging over the side. Rune settled beside the cot, wet fur steaming faintly in the heat. Amos placed the gray plastic bin within reach, near Rune's front paws. "Your dog seems to think this is important," he said. Grant stared at the bin. "It isn't." Amos grunted. "Dogs don't usually guard things that mean nothing." Grant closed his eyes. The old man did not press. Somewhere nearby, metal shifted. A kettle hissed. The storm beat against the roof, but inside the forge, the sound changed. It became distant, almost ceremonial, like drums beyond a mountain. Sleep took Grant in pieces. When he woke again, he did not know if minutes or hours had passed. The hail had softened to snow. The forge glowed lower now, but still warm. Rune lay close beside him, his muzzle resting on the gray plastic bin. His amber eyes were open, watching the door. Across the room, Amos Hardy stood at the anvil. He lifted a hammer and brought it down. Once, a pause. Again. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, gentle enough not to startle, strong enough to be real. Each strike rang through the forge like the heartbeat of something older than the town itself. Grant listened, caught between waking and memory, and for the first time in a long while, the sound of metal did not feel like danger. It felt like a call. He turned his head toward the window. Silverpine slept beneath the falling snow. Roofs pale, chimneys breathing. Streets empty. The old mining town looked peaceful, almost innocent, as if it had not burned, as if it had not misplaced names, as if it had not waited 2 years for a man and his dog to return by accident. Grant looked at the red heart of the forge and told himself he would stay only until the truck ran again, only until the weather cleared, only until he could stand without the room tilting. Rune did not look at the door. He looked toward the town, ears lifted, eyes steady, as if he knew something Grant did not. Silverpine had not let them go, or perhaps, in its strange snow-covered way, it had never stopped waiting. Morning did not arrive in Silverpine like an army. It came quietly, walking over the roofs in pale gold boots, touching the snowbanks, the porch rails, the dark pine branches, and the old mining road with a gentleness that almost seemed apologetic. After the hail, the town looked washed clean. Every fence wore a white cap, every chimney breathed. The diner sign at the center of town swung lightly in the cold, its red letters half covered in frost. Mabel's table. Grant Ashby saw it all through the forge window while holding a chipped mug of coffee that tasted like it had once heard rumors of coffee and taken offense. He had been awake since before dawn. That was not unusual. Sleep for Grant had become a room with too many exits and no comfortable chair. He woke easily, stayed awake stubbornly, and told himself it was discipline instead of exhaustion. The cot near the stove had been warm enough. Rune had slept beside him. Amos Hardy had given him a blanket thick enough to stop a small avalanche. None of that explained why Grant had opened his eyes before the sun and immediately looked for the door. Old habits survived better than good intentions. Across the forge, Amos worked as if the storm had been nothing but poor scheduling. The old blacksmith stood at his anvil in a red-brown flannel shirt, sleeves rolled despite the cold, a leather apron hanging from his chest like the hide of some defeated beast. His white hair escaped from beneath a dark wool cap. His hands, broad and scarred, moved with the certainty of a man who had spent half a century arguing with iron and winning often enough to remain arrogant. The forge itself was less a building than a living creature. It breathed heat. It smelled of coal, leather, pine smoke, old metal, and bitter coffee. Hammers hung in rows along the wall, each one shaped by use. Tongs rested like sleeping birds. Horseshoes, hinges, hooks, stove parts, kitchen knives, and odd twisted objects Grant could not identify crowded the benches. Near the back, under a cloth darkened by age, something round and blackened leaned against the stone wall. Amos lifted a glowing strip of iron from the fire and laid it on the anvil. He struck it once. Grant's fingers tightened around the mug. The sound ran through him before he could stop it. Not loud, not even sharp. But somewhere in his body, a door slammed open, his shoulders locked, his breath shortened. He kept his face still because pride, unlike wisdom, was always awake early. Rune raised his head from the mat near the door. Amos noticed without looking like he noticed. The next strike came slower, then another. Not the quick ringing rhythm Grant had heard in the night, but something steadier, spaced apart like footsteps crossing a wooden bridge. Strike, pause, strike, pause. Grant stared into the coffee. Amos said, "If the hammer's too loud, say so." "It's your forge." That wasn't the question. Grant took a drink, regretted it immediately, and said, "Coffee's louder." Amos looked over at him, one white eyebrow rising. Rune made a soft huff from the mat, a sound suspiciously close to agreement. The old man grunted. "Dog has taste. That'll cause trouble in this town." Grant almost smiled. Almost. He set the mug down and crossed to the open bay where his old pickup sat under a dusting of snow, towed in some time before dawn by a neighbor Amos had called. The truck looked worse in daylight. Moss-green dents from old repairs, rust along the wheel wells, a cracked mirror. Hail marks newly scattered across the hood like a map of bad luck. Grant opened the hood and leaned in. Work was easier than conversation. Machines might fail, but they did not pretend to care. A dead alternator, a loose cable, a flooded line, each had a shape, a cause, a consequence. You did not have to explain to a truck why you had stopped answering mail. Behind him, the forge door opened. Cold air swept in, carrying the smell of snow and cinnamon. "Well, Amos Hardy," a woman's voice declared, "if this coffee killed him, I'm not helping you hide the body." Grant turned. The woman who stepped inside was in her early 60s, round-faced, bright-eyed, wrapped in a burgundy winter coat over a flour-dusted apron she had apparently forgotten to remove. Her gray blonde hair was piled in a messy bun, and she carried a paper bag in one hand and a steel coffee thermos in the other, like sacred offerings. The warm smell of apple pastry entered with her, defeating the forge coffee without drawing a sword. Amos did not turn from the anvil. "Mabel, you accuse me of crimes before breakfast too often." "I accuse you of crimes because you commit them in mugs." Her eyes found Grant, measured him quickly, and softened without turning sweet. Mabel Cross had the face of a woman who had fed miners, widows, road crews, firefighters, and men too proud to admit they were hungry. She did not ask if Grant wanted food. She put the bag on the bench near him. "Apple turnovers," she said. "Slightly ugly, still better than whatever grief he's boiling in that pot." Grant nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." "Oh, listen to that, Amos. Manners survived the hail." Rune rose from the mat and approached her with great dignity, nose working. Mabel looked down at him. "And you must be the officer in charge." Rune sniffed the paper bag. "Handsome," she said. "Very serious. Too much hair for elected office, but we've done worse." Rune's tail moved once. Grant blinked. It was not a wag exactly, more like a private signature. Mabel saw it and placed a hand over her heart. "I've been approved." "Don't let it go to your head," Grant said before he could stop himself. Mabel beamed at him as if he had recited poetry. "There he is," she said. "I knew there was a man under all that weather." Grant looked back into the engine bay, but the warmth in the room had shifted, not softened him exactly. Softness was too much to ask of a man who still slept in boots. But it had touched the edges. Over the next few days, Silverpine revealed itself in pieces. The town was not large. A main street, a diner, a feed store that sold everything from nails to canned peaches, a small clinic near the county office, a church with a repaired steeple but no bell, houses patched with mismatched wood, new roofs beside burned beams, fresh paint beside smoke-stained stone. Silverpine looked like a person who had been singed by fire and still chosen to button a clean shirt in the morning. Grant learned this mostly by trying not to learn it. He fixed one battery connection on his truck, found 2 more problems, cursed none of them loudly enough for Amos to comment, and accepted that leaving would not be as simple as turning a key. His body did not approve of staying upright too long. His lower back tightened. His left knee pulsed in cold weather. His shoulder ached when he reached too far. Old injuries rose like creditors. He thanked Amos in short sentences. Amos answered in shorter ones. It should have been a peaceful arrangement, except Amos kept handing him tools. "Hold this. Lift that. Don't stand there unless you want your boot decorated." At first, Grant assumed the old man wanted free labor. Then he realized Amos was measuring him the way he measured iron, not asking what had bent him, only testing where heat might help. One afternoon, Amos placed a narrow bar of iron in the fire. "People think the hammer fixes it," he said. Grant stood near the workbench, arms crossed, navy blue t-shirt visible beneath his open jacket. "Doesn't it?" "The hammer persuades. Fire does the softening. Cooling does the keeping." Amos glanced at him. "Hit cold iron hard enough, it just cracks." Grant looked away first. Outside, Rune lay near the open door with his front paws crossed, watching snow fall from the eaves. He had taken to the forge more easily than Grant had. He greeted Amos with solemn respect, tolerated the hammer after the old man adjusted his rhythm, and considered Mabel a valuable supplier of pastry crumbs. He had also claimed the space near the door where he could see the road, the truck, the forge, and Grant at the same time, a knight with fur, a gatekeeper with amber eyes. That afternoon, a thin elderly woman in a blue coat stopped by with a broken stove handle wrapped in cloth. Amos introduced her as Nora Vale. Her cheeks were narrow, her hair white and pinned carefully beneath a knit hat, and her hands trembled slightly from cold or age or both. She smiled at Rune with a grief so familiar, Grant looked away. "My shepherd used to sit just like that," she said. Rune did not move toward her. He simply lowered his head enough that she could touch the space between his ears if she wished. Nora's fingers hovered, then rested lightly on his fur. "Well," she whispered, "aren't you something?" No one said anything for a moment. Then Amos cleared his throat and took the stove handle from her. "This thing's uglier than Mabel's biscuits." Nora laughed, and the small spell broke without shattering. When she left, Grant noticed the blue tarp folded over part of her roof across the street. The rest of the house had been repaired, but that section sagged under snow. "Storm damage?" he asked. Amos followed his gaze. "Fire damage, 2 winters ago." "Still?" "Paper says it was fixed." Grant looked at him. Amos shrugged, but his mouth hardened. "Paper's talented that way." Later, Warren Pike came by, carrying a length of chain and a hinge from an old kennel door. He was 67, tall and lean in a faded firefighter's coat, with a narrow gray mustache and eyes that checked exits, roof lines, and wind direction before settling on faces. A rescue whistle hung from his neck. He moved slowly, but not weakly, like a man who had learned to save energy for when it mattered. "Dog's pen latch snapped again," Warren told Amos. "Thought the county helped you build a new one," Amos said. Warren's expression did not change. County thought so too. Grant heard it. Another small wrongness dropped into the forge like a nail nobody wanted to step on. He did not ask. He told himself he did not care. That evening, when the light turned blue and the forge windows glowed amber, a younger woman arrived from the clinic. Delia Hardy did not enter the forge like someone arriving to rescue anyone. She came in carrying a small medical bag and wearing a navy winter jacket over pale blue scrubs, her dark hair tied low at the back of her neck. Snow dusted her shoulders. Her face was calm, not soft exactly, but attentive in a way that made lying feel like wasted effort. "Uncle Amos," she said, "when you leave a message that says, 'Found a man in the road,' might be stubborn. The clinic does tend to ask follow-up questions." Amos pointed at Grant. "There he is. Stubborn part confirmed." Grant closed the truck hood. "I'm fine." Delia looked at him for 3 seconds. It was not a dramatic look. It was worse. It was professional. "Of course," she said. "That's what everyone says right before they sit down." "I don't need medical attention." "Good. Then this will be quick." Rune rose and placed himself halfway between them. Delia stopped immediately, lowered her hand, and let him study her. She did not reach for his head, did not make the little clicking noises people made when they wanted animals to approve of them quickly. She simply stood still. Rune sniffed the air. Delia's gaze shifted to the notch in his left ear, the old leather collar, the way his body stayed angled toward Grant. "Good dog," she said quietly, as if naming a fact rather than offering praise. Rune stepped aside. Grant noticed. Of course he noticed. Rune did not give trust away like church flyers. Delia checked Grant's wrist where he had strained it, working under the truck. She asked about dizziness, food, sleep, medication. Grant answered as little as possible. Amos made unhelpful sounds from the anvil. Mabel, who had arrived with more coffee and no invitation, stood beside Rune and whispered, "He's lying," but politely. "I can hear you," Grant said. Good, Mabel replied. Saves time. Delia did not smile much, but one corner of her mouth moved. She left pain reliever, a wrap for his wrist, and her card from the county veterans clinic. Grant looked at the card as though it might bite. No forms, Delia said. He looked up. Not today, she added. No one is asking you to sign anything. No one is putting you in a system before supper. That should not have mattered. It did. Grant's hand closed around the card, then opened again. I'm not good with clinics. Most people I see aren't good with clinics, Delia said. Some of them are good with trucks, some with dogs, some with pretending not to limp. Amos coughed into his fist. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Delia turned to leave, then paused near the workbench. The gray plastic bin sat there open. Grant had taken out a few papers earlier while looking for the truck title. On top lay a worn medical patch, folded into an envelope to keep it from fraying. Delia's eyes stopped on it, only for a moment. But the room changed around that moment. Her face did not fall apart. She was too controlled for that. Still, something passed through her eyes, recognition or memory, or the shadow of a name she did not speak. Grant noticed because noticing small changes had once kept him alive. Delia looked from the patch to Amos, then to Grant. You should keep that dry, she said. It's just old cloth. Old cloth survives by accident, she said. Doesn't mean it has no story. Then she left. Grant watched the door close behind her. Amos returned to the anvil and said nothing. Mabel, for once, also said nothing. That silence stayed with Grant longer than the conversation. Near dusk the next day, Amos pulled the dark cloth from the round object leaning against the back wall. It was a bell, or it had been. Blackened by fire, cracked along one side, its rim warped and scarred, the old church bell looked less like an instrument than a fallen moon dragged from a battlefield. Grant stood over it, hands in his jacket pockets. Rune came to his side and sniffed the metal, then sat. Pulled that from the church ruins after the fire, Amos said. Couldn't let them haul it off. It won't ring like it did. No? Then why keep it? Amos ran his thumb along the cracked rim. Because ringing like it did isn't the only reason a bell exists. Grant did not answer. The old man picked up a small file and worked gently at one damaged edge, metal dust catching the forge light. One day, Amos said, I'll make it speak again. Grant heard himself say, some things burn and should be left alone. The words came out colder than he intended. Rune turned his head and looked at him, not sharply, not sadly. Just with that calm, unbearable attention dogs sometimes carried, as if they had been present when humans first invented denial and had never been impressed. Amos glanced at Rune, then barked a laugh. That dog just called you a fool, he said. Politely, more than I was planning. Grant looked down at Rune. Traitor? Rune blinked once. Mabel, who had entered quietly enough to hear the last part, said, I vote with the dog. Nobody asked for a vote, Grant said. This is Silverpine, Mabel replied. We vote on other people's business recreationally. For the first time since arriving, Grant laughed. It was small, rusted, half startled by its own existence. But it was real enough that Amos paused with the file in his hand, and Mabel pretended to fuss with the coffee thermos so no one had to make a holy moment out of it. That night, the forge settled into warmth. Amos slept in the small back room. Rune lay near the stove. The town outside was quiet beneath a fresh layer of snow. Grant sat on the cot with the gray plastic bin open beside him, sorting papers because he could not sleep and because Delia's look at the old patch had unsettled him. Most of the pages meant nothing at first glance. Numbers, case IDs, notices, duplicate requests, a letter about missing documentation, another about incorrect coding. One envelope, bent and water-stained, had the Silverpine County seal at the top. Grant almost set it aside. Then he saw the phrase, "Wildfire Recovery Preliminary Assistance." He unfolded it carefully. The letter stated that Grant Ashby had received preliminary local assistance related to temporary housing displacement, property loss, and animal evacuation support following the Silverpine wildfire. Grant read the sentence once, then again. The forge seemed to grow quieter. He had received nothing, no housing assistance, no animal support payment, no explanation, no check, no voucher, no call that had led anywhere but another hallway of hold music. Only letters, only mistakes, only the slow, polite disappearance of his name. His jaw tightened. A heat rose behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the stove. He crushed the letter in one fist and stood. Rune lifted his head. Grant crossed to the forge. The fire glowed low but alive, red beneath black coal. It would take the paper easily. A small twist of the wrist and the letter would become ash like the cabin, like the roof beams, like the last version of himself that had believed records mattered. He raised his hand. Rune moved fast. The German shepherd stood between Grant and the fire, broad chest blocking the forge mouth. He did not bark. He did not growl. He only planted his paws and looked up at Grant with amber eyes, steady as lanterns. "Move," Grant said. Rune did not. Grant looked at the crumpled letter in his hand, then at the dog. The anger did not vanish. It changed shape, became heavier, became something that did not want to burn because burning was too easy. Burning made the pain private again. Burning let the paper win by disappearing. Grant slowly lowered his hand. Behind him, Amos's voice came from the dark doorway of the back room, rough with sleep. "Dog's right." Grant did not turn. "You don't know what this is." "No," Amos said. "But I know when something's trying hard not to be buried." Rune stayed where he was until Grant stepped back from the fire. Only then did the dog return to the cot, take the crumpled letter gently from Grant's loosened hand, and place it beside the gray plastic bin. Not in the fire. Beside the rest of the story. Grant stood in the forge light, listening to the quiet town beyond the walls. Snow tapped softly at the window. Somewhere in Silverpine, Nora Vale's blue tarp held another night against the cold. Warren Pike's old kennel latch waited for repair. The church bell sat blackened and mute beneath its cloth. Grant told himself he still planned to leave when the truck ran. But for the first time, the thought sounded less like a decision and more like a habit. Rune lay down with his muzzle near the letter, and the forge kept breathing. The morning Corbin Wexler came to the forge. Silverpine looked innocent enough to fool a saint. Snow lay bright on the roofs, smooth as sifted sugar. The sky was a hard winter blue, and every pine branch along the road glittered as if the mountain had dressed itself for a holiday. Meltwater ran in thin silver lines along the street, turning the mud beside the forge into a dark, slushy mess that clung to boots and tires and the hems of honest pants. That was the first thing Mabel Cross noticed. Not the county jacket, not the leather case, not the careful smile. The shoes. Corbin Wexler stepped from a dark county sedan wearing polished brown boots that looked almost untouched by the road. They were not new exactly, but they were maintained with the kind of attention no Silverpine winter respected. His coat bore the county seal near the chest. His light brown hair was combed neatly to one side. His face was smooth, his jaw narrow, his smile practiced enough to seem friendly from far away and measured from up close. Mabel stood near Amos Hardy's temporary coffee corner inside the forge, holding a mug she had brought from her own diner because she no longer trusted Amos with human beverages. She looked Corbin up and down through the open bay door. "Well," she said, not quietly enough, "in Silverpine, clean shoes in mud season mean one of two things: tourist lost from the ski road or a man who never helped shovel anybody out. Amos, bent over a hinge at the workbench, did not look up. Could be both. Grant Ashby was under the hood of his pickup, forearms braced, jaw tight with concentration. The truck had begun to resemble a wounded animal, refusing either recovery or surrender. He had coaxed one system back to life only to discover another ready to quit. That suited him in a bitter way. At least the truck had the decency to fail honestly. Rune lay near the forge door, head between his paws, amber eyes half open. The German shepherd had claimed that place over the past few days. From there, he could watch Grant, Amos, the road, the plastic bin of papers, and anyone foolish enough to enter without being measured first. He looked calm, but not asleep. Rune rarely wasted sleep on strangers. Corbin paused at the threshold and gave the room a pleasant smile. "Mr. Hardy," he said. "Good morning?" Amos struck the hinge once with a small hammer. "Morning was doing fine." Corbin's smile held, though one edge weakened. "I'm here for Mr. Ashby." Grant did not move immediately. He knew the voice before he placed the man. Not personally, not exactly, but he knew the type. Men who stood outside suffering and called it a process. Men who brought folders instead of answers. Men who spoke in the gentle tone of a locked door. He closed the hood slowly and turned. Corbin extended a hand. "Grant Ashby?" "Corbin Wexler, Veterans Recovery Liaison with the county." Grant glanced at the hand, then at the county seal. He did not shake. Corbin lowered his hand as if that had been expected. "I understand you had some trouble on the road the other night. Glad you're all right." Grant said nothing. Mabel sipped her coffee. Amos adjusted the hinge in his vise. Rune's ears lifted. Corbin continued, "I've been trying to locate you for some time. Your case came back across my desk after the storm system damaged a few records and triggered a review of unresolved fire recovery claims." "Convenient," Amos said. Corbin turned toward him. "Actually, Mr. Hardy, these reviews happen routinely." "Most bad weather does." The smile tightened again. Grant wiped his hands on a rag. "What do you want?" Corbin looked relieved by the directness. Direct men, Grant had learned, often made paperwork people feel useful. It let them pretend the problem was simply a matter of delivery. "I want to help you close a difficult chapter," Corbin said. Mabel's mug stopped halfway to her mouth. Grant felt the old anger stir, not hot yet, just waking under ash. Corbin opened the leather case and removed a folder with a paperclip placed exactly at the top. "Your VA benefits matter is separate, of course. That's federal. I don't make decisions there." "Then why are you here?" "Because the county still has local recovery options related to the Silverpine wildfire. Temporary displacement, property loss, animal evacuation support. In your case, given the age of the claim and the complications with your federal file, we may be able to offer a modest settlement from the remaining local assistance pool." Grant stared at him. The words sounded helpful. That was the worst part. They came dressed in clean clothes. Corbin laid the papers on the workbench. "This would not prevent you from continuing to pursue your federal VA benefits. I want to be clear about that." "Kind of you," Amos muttered. "But," Corbin said, choosing not to hear him, "it would resolve the county's side of the matter. You'd confirm receipt of preliminary assistance, acknowledge no further local claim related to the cabin loss, temporary housing, animal evacuation, or companion animal support, and accept the settlement as final." The forge seemed to quiet around the last word. Final. It was a small word, 6 letters, clean, efficient, a coffin with paperwork handles. Grant looked down at the pages. His name appeared in the top corner. Full legal name, old cabin address, case number. Dates he remembered only as weather and waiting rooms. There were highlighted lines, signature tabs, a place for initials. Whoever prepared the packet had done so neatly. too neatly. "How much?" Grant asked. Corbin named a number. Mabel made a sound that could have curdled milk. Amos finally looked up. Grant did not react. That was a skill, too. Men like Corbin watched for anger. They were trained to wait it out, cool it down, translate it into non-compliance. Grant gave him nothing. Corbin softened his voice. "I know it isn't everything you hoped for." Grant almost laughed. Hope had not been in the room for years, and this man had the nerve to speak as if it had missed an appointment. "But with delayed claims," Corbin continued, "there's a point where pursuing every channel costs more than it returns. The longer this stretches, the more it hurts you. I'm trying to keep that from happening." Rune rose. No one told him to. He simply stood, slow and deliberate, and walked to Grant's side. His black and gold body moved between Grant and the workbench, not aggressively at first, just present, a wall with fur and breath. Corbin looked down. "Oh," he said lightly. "And this must be Rune. Companion animal listed in your file, correct?" Grant's eyes sharpened. "I didn't tell you his name." Corbin tapped the folder. "It's included in the intake summary." Rune's head lowered. A sound formed deep in his chest. Not a bark. Not yet. Corbin gave a small practiced chuckle and crouched slightly, extending his hand palm down. "Easy there. Veteran dogs can be sensitive. I've worked with plenty." Rune stepped back half a pace. That was what made Grant notice. Rune did not retreat from many things. Not from hail. Not from strange roads. Not from Amos's hammer once he understood it. The dog did not show fear now exactly. His ears stayed high, his body ready. But something in Corbin's movement had touched a memory beneath training. The county man's key ring swung from his belt. Metal clicked softly. Rune's gaze snapped to it. Click. A tiny sound, hardly louder than the forge settling. But Rune's whole body changed. His shoulders stiffened. His nose worked once, then again. The black notch of his nose lifted toward Corbin's coat, catching something beneath wool, starch, cold air, and polished leather. Old smoke, maybe. Industrial cleaner, damp concrete remembered in the blood. Shelter pins, the press of strangers. Grant gone somewhere behind glass doors and paperwork. Corbin smiled down at him. "The longer it stretches," he said again gently, "the more it hurts." Rune growled. This time everyone heard it. Amos set his hammer down. Mabel lowered her mug. Grant did not look away from Corbin. For a moment the forge held still. Even the fire seemed to listen. Corbin straightened. "I didn't mean to upset him." "No," Grant said. "I don't think you meant to." The sentence landed heavier than accusation. Corbin gathered himself. "Mr. Ashby, I understand distrust. Truly. These systems can be frustrating." Mabel whispered, "If he says journey, I'm throwing coffee." Corbin ignored her again, though a faint flush rose along his neck. Grant looked at the highlighted signature line. A tired part of him wanted to sign. That was the truth, and it shamed him more than anger would have. Not because he trusted Corbin. He did not. Not because the amount mattered. It barely did. He wanted to sign because signing promised an ending. A small bad ending, yes, but an ending he could put in the rearview mirror. No more calls, no more envelopes, no more polite strangers explaining why his name had not matched the correct line. No more walking into offices where the fluorescent lights made every man look like a misplaced file. His hand moved toward the pen. Rune pressed against his leg. Not hard, not dramatic. Just enough. Grant stopped. Rune did not look at the papers. He looked at Grant. That was worse. The dog had crossed storms for him, slept in freezing trucks beside him, guarded him when strangers drove past. Now Rune was not guarding a door or a body. He was guarding the 1 second in which Grant might surrender something he did not fully understand, simply because he was tired. Grant withdrew his hand. "I'll read it later." Corbin's smile thinned. "Of course." Though I should mention the local assistance window is limited. Windows open and close, Amos said. Doors, too. Some even hit people on the way out. Mabel nodded. Especially in old buildings. Tragic? Corbin placed the pen back into his folder. He kept his voice polite, but the warmth had gone from it. I'll leave a copy. I do recommend prompt action. He looked once more at Rune. Rune did not blink. Corbin left the papers on the workbench and walked back to the sedan, his clean boots picking careful paths through mud he seemed determined not to touch. After his car disappeared down the road, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Mabel said, I dislike that man in a very organized way. Amos grunted. Good, saves filing. Grant picked up the folder. The pages felt heavier than they should have. Delia Hardy arrived after lunch, called by Amos with a message so short it could have been carved into stone. County man came. Papers stink. She came still wearing her clinic jacket over scrubs, snow clinging to her boots, dark hair tied low. She did not rush in like a rescuer. She entered, removed her gloves, greeted Rune first with a quiet nod, then took the chair opposite Grant. You don't have to show me, she said. Grant placed the folder on the table. I know. That was the only permission she needed. Delia read carefully, not dramatically, not with gasps or theatrical outrage. She turned pages, checked dates, ran one finger beneath the narrow language near the signature boxes. Her calm made the document seem uglier. This doesn't close your VA claim, she said finally. Corbin said that. He was telling the truth in the smallest possible way. Amos smiled without humor. That's a county specialty. Delia tapped one section. But if you sign here, you acknowledge receiving preliminary local assistance after the fire. Housing, evacuation support, property loss, and animal-related support. You also agree not to pursue further local relief tied to those same categories. Grant looked at the words. They had been there before. Somehow, under Delia's finger, they grew teeth. I didn't receive it. I believe you. The answer came so quickly he had to look at her. Delia did not soften it. She simply let it stand. Grant swallowed. Rune was in a shelter during that time. It lists him as processed through animal evacuation support. I was in Denver, medical evaluations, buses, waiting rooms, motels when I had cash. The memories broke apart as he tried to line them up. I don't remember signing anything. This packet suggests someone wants the county side settled before anyone asks why earlier records say you already received help. Grant leaned back. The forge heat pressed against his face, but his hands had gone cold. Delia closed the folder. There's someone I want to call before you do anything. June Calder. She's an attorney, semi-retired. Used to work with a veterans nonprofit in the Rockies. She comes through our clinic once a month to help people understand paperwork. I don't need a lawyer. No one ever says that while holding a document they fully understand. Mabel pointed at Delia with her mug. That one's going on a pillow. Grant rubbed a hand over his face. I'm not starting a war over a few pages. Delia's eyes moved toward the window, where Nora Vale's roof was visible beyond the snow in the street. The blue tarp had dipped under fresh weight. It may not be only your few pages, she said. As if summoned by the sentence, the forge door opened and Nora Vale stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold, a folded envelope held in both hands. Amos, she said, then stopped when she saw the faces around the table. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't, Mabel said. We were just becoming suspicious as a community. Nora hesitated, then looked at Grant. Mr. Ashby, Mabel told me you'd had trouble with fire recovery papers. Grant shot Mabel a look. Mabel shrugged. I tell people things when they need telling. It's a public service. Nora held out the envelope. Mine says my roof was repaired with county assistance. It wasn't, My nephew patched it with tarp and fence boards. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood." Her voice did not shake, but it had been trained not to. Delia took the envelope only after Nora nodded permission. A few minutes later, Warren Pike arrived with a receipt folded into the pocket of his old firefighter coat. He had heard from Nora, who had heard from Mabel, who had not technically promised confidentiality to anyone. The paper claimed a new insulated dog shelter had been approved and completed for Warren's therapy dog after the wildfire. Warren removed his cap and looked at the floor. "I built him a windbreak myself," he said. "Scrap wood. It holds if the wind behaves." Mabel's expression darkened. Amos stared at the table. Grant looked from Nora's envelope to Warren's receipt to his own folder. A pattern did not need to shout to be heard. Delia called June Calder from the Forge office because Amos claimed the old wall phone was more trustworthy than those glass rectangles everyone worships. June answered on the third ring. Her voice came through low and dry, the voice of a woman who had read enough contracts to hate adjectives. Delia explained only what she had permission to explain. June asked 3 questions. Who signed? Who received funds? Who has copies? Then she said, "Nobody signs anything. Nobody destroys anything. Make copies. Photograph every page. Keep originals dry. I want to see the full packet before Mr. Ashby puts his name on so much as a napkin." Grant, standing in the doorway, heard enough. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. June's voice sharpened through the receiver. "Trouble already found your paperwork, Mr. Ashby. You're deciding whether to leave it alone with your signature." No one in the room commented on the fact that Grant had not introduced himself. Maybe Delia had said his name. Maybe June had guessed. Either way, the line went quiet after that, and Grant felt something inside him resist and lean forward at the same time. When Delia returned the phone to its cradle, the forge had changed. Not visibly. The hammers still hung. The fire still breathed. Rune still lay near the table, eyes open. But the room no longer felt like a refuge from the storm. It felt like the first chamber beneath a mountain, where old kings hid their records and old wrongs waited with dust on their shoulders. Delia began gathering the papers into separate stacks. Grant helped reluctantly, then less reluctantly. Nora signed a short note giving permission for June to review her envelope. Warren did the same. Mabel announced she would bring her diner ledger later because men in clean coats always eat before doing ugly things. Amos went back to the anvil, but he did not strike. He only stood there, one hand resting on the hammer, looking older for the first time since Grant had met him. Delia paused beside the gray plastic bin. The old medical patch still lay near the edge, the one she had noticed the day before. Grant had moved it aside while searching for fire letters, but now it sat in the open, faded stitching visible in the forge light. Delia picked it up carefully. Grant's body went still. "Where did you get this?" she asked. His answer came too fast. "Old deployment?" "I know that." Her voice had changed, not louder, smaller. Amos turned from the anvil. Mabel stopped pretending to rearrange envelopes. Delia's thumb brushed the worn edge of the patch. "Did you serve with a medic named Caleb Hardy?" The forge fire snapped softly. Grant felt the name enter the room before he answered. It did not walk in like a memory. It rose like heat through stone. Caleb Hardy. A young man's steady hands, a voice close to his ear telling him to stay awake. A joke made at the wrong time because terror hated being laughed at. A patch pressed briefly against Grant's chest as if the man wearing it had been holding a door shut between this world and the next. Grant had spent years not saying that name. Not in bars, not in clinics, not into the dark roof of the truck when Rune slept beside him. His throat tightened. "Yes." Delia looked at Amos. The old blacksmith's face had gone quiet, in a way Grant had not seen before. Not hard, not soft, quiet like snow over a grave, though no grave was mentioned. Grant forced the words out. He was a medic attached to us. He helped me. More than helped. Delia's eyes shone, but she did not let tears fall. He was my father. The room held its breath. Grant looked at her, then at Amos, and understood suddenly that the forge was not merely a place he had been brought to by chance. It was a house built around a name he had carried like hidden iron for years. "I didn't know," he said. Delia nodded once. "I believe you." It was the second time she had said those words to him that day. The first had touched his anger. This one touched something much older. Outside the forge, snow continued to fall in bright, silent sheets over Silverpine. It covered the mud around Corbin Wexler's clean footprints. It softened Nora's blue tarp, Warren's old truck, the diner sign, the church without its bell, and the road that had brought Grant back. Inside, the forge glowed red. The papers lay on the table. Rune rested his head beside the gray plastic bin, amber eyes open as if guarding not only Grant's name now, but Caleb Hardy's too. And in the heart of the fire, some old secret seemed to heat at last, waiting for the hammer. Grant Ashby decided to leave before sunrise. He did not announce it. Announcements invited questions, and questions had a way of becoming chairs pulled close to a table. He had never trusted chairs pulled close to tables. Too many forms got signed there. Too many men were asked to explain the shape of things they had survived. So he folded his spare shirt, closed the gray plastic bin, and stood beside the cot in the dim heat of the forge while Silverpine slept under fresh snow. Rune watched him from the mat near the stove. The German shepherd did not rise. He only lifted his amber eyes, steady and disappointed in the quiet way dogs had perfected long before humans invented language badly enough to lie with it. "Don't start," Grant murmured. Rune blinked once. Grant looked toward the back room where Amos Hardy slept, then toward the forge windows where the town beyond was just a pale suggestion under moonlight. He could leave before anyone woke, walk to the truck, coax it far enough down the road, disappear before Delia could look at him again with Caleb Hardy's eyes hiding behind her own. Caleb Hardy. The name had not left the forge since Delia spoke it. It sat in the rafters with the smoke. It glowed beneath the coals. It waited in the silence between hammer strikes. Grant had carried that name for years, like a piece of hot iron pressed into his palm. He could not drop it, because dropping it felt like betrayal. He could not hold it properly, because holding it burned. So he had done what men often did when they called themselves disciplined, but were only afraid. He built his life around not touching the thing at all. He had meant to call Caleb's family. At first he told himself he would do it when he could speak clearly, then when the paperwork settled, then when his hands stopped shaking in the mornings, then after the fire, then after the next address, then after one more week. A week became a month became a year became a road, and now the daughter of the man who had kept him alive had stood in Amos Hardy's forge and said, "He was my father." Grant picked up the gray bin. Rune rose, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to stand between Grant and the door. "Move," Grant said. Rune did not. Grant exhaled through his nose. "You did this yesterday with the fire. Don't make it a habit." Rune's ears tilted forward. The forge door opened before Grant could step around him. Delia Hardy stood outside in the snow-blue dawn, one hand raised as if she had been about to knock. She wore a thick navy parka over her clinic scrubs, her dark hair tied low, a small canvas satchel over one shoulder. Her face showed no surprise at seeing Grant pack to leave. Somehow, that made it worse. "Early start," she said. Grant set the bin down. "Truck needs running." "At dawn?" "Roads are quieter." "So are graves," Amos called from the back room, voice rough with sleep. "Doesn't make them good places to live?" Grant closed his eyes briefly. Delia stepped inside, brushing snow from her boots. "I'm not here to stop you." "Good. I brought something." That stopped him more effectively than any plea could have. Delia removed 3 envelopes from the satchel. They were old, cream-colored, their corners softened by years of being opened and closed with care. Grant knew immediately they were not official. No seal, no barcode, no threat disguised as polite formatting. Letters. "My father wrote these," Delia said. "Some before his last deployment, some earlier. They're not about you, not directly. I wouldn't hand you something private to make you bleed on command." Grant looked at the envelopes but did not reach for them. Delia understood. She placed them on the workbench instead. "I wanted you to know who he was outside the uniform." The forge was quiet. Even Amos did not move from the doorway of his small room. Rune returned to Grant's side, but this time he did not block the door. He pressed his shoulder against Grant's leg, as if standing watch over a choice that could not be forced. Delia opened the first envelope and unfolded one page. "He sang the wrong words to the national anthem," she said. Loudly, confidently, like accuracy was a civilian weakness. Amos made a sound behind them. It could have been grief. It could have been a laugh. With Amos, the two often shared a coat. Delia's mouth softened. "He once tried to fix the roof during a windstorm because he said ladders respected courage. The ladder disagreed." Amos muttered, "That ladder was right. And he burned pancakes so badly when I was 7 that I called them breakfast coal for a year." Grant felt something loosen in his chest, not enough to stop hurting, just enough to change the shape of the pain. Caleb Hardy had become myth in Grant's memory. A medic in smoke and noise, hand steady, voice low. A man who had stood at the edge of Grant's life and refused to let it tip into the dark. Grant had preserved him that way because myths were easier to owe than people. Myths did not burn pancakes. They did not fall off ladders. They did not sing wrong words while daughters laughed at them. Delia unfolded another page. "This line," she said quietly, "I thought you should hear." She read without ceremony, which made the words land harder. "People keep telling me the ones we save owe us something. I don't like that. If a man walks out alive, I hope he doesn't build a prison from gratitude. The gift is not the debt. The living is the gift." Grant looked down. His hands had curled into fists without his permission. Amos stepped fully into the forge, wearing suspenders over a thermal shirt, white hair wild from sleep. He looked older in the morning light, but not weaker, just more human. He took a bar of iron from a rack and slid it into the coals. For a while, nobody spoke. The iron darkened, then reddened slowly. Amos watched the color rise. Caleb saved people because he believed that's what a man should do when someone was in front of him needing help. Grant's throat worked. "He saved me. I know that now. I should have called." "Yes," Amos said. The honesty struck harder than comfort. Then Amos looked at him. "But I'm not interested in making a shrine out of what you should have done. I've got enough broken things in here already." Grant looked at the floor. Amos pulled the iron from the fire. It glowed orange at the tip. "My son did not give you years so you could drag them behind you like chains," he said. "Don't turn his faith into your jailer." He set the iron on the anvil, but did not strike it yet. "Heat first," he said, almost to himself, "then the hammer." Grant stayed, not because he was healed, not because 3 letters and 1 old man's sentence had unlocked a gate. He stayed because leaving at that moment would have been another way of making Caleb's name too heavy to carry. By mid-morning, the forge had become less a refuge and more a command post disguised as a place of work. June Calder arrived in a gray parka and black gloves, driving a white SUV with mud along the doors and a cracked Veterans Nonprofit sticker on the rear window. She was 58, slim and straight-backed, with short silver hair tucked beneath a knit cap and narrow glasses that gave her the look of someone who could see through both lies and poor punctuation. She carried a worn brown leather document bag that seemed older than several county offices and twice as trustworthy. She did not introduce herself with warmth. She introduced herself with a question. "Who has the originals?" Mabel, who had been setting out coffee and cinnamon rolls on a side bench, whispered, "I like her already." June turned. "Are those for everyone or bait?" "Both," Mabel said. "Efficient." That was as close to friendship as June seemed willing to travel before noon. She sat at Amos's work table and laid out folders, blank consent forms, a portable scanner, sticky notes, and a black fountain pen. The forge, which had known hammers and heat for decades, now found itself hosting the colder craft of documentation. June explained the rules before touching a single page. No one would open private records without consent. No one would take originals away from their owners unless copies were made and receipts written. No one would exaggerate, guess, or clean up timelines to make them sound better. The truth, June said, had to be collected in a way that could survive a room full of people paid to dismiss it. "Anger is useful for getting out of bed," she said. "It is useless on an evidence table unless it brings receipts." Amos glanced at Grant. "She'd make a fine blacksmith." June looked at the anvil. "Too loud." "Paperwork's louder," Grant said. Mabel pointed at him with a cinnamon roll. "There, he's learning." Delia became the bridge between people and process. She did not reach into clinic files. She called Nora Vale and Warren Pike and 2 other veterans from the edge of town, explaining exactly what June needed and what they did not have to share. Her voice stayed calm, practical, respectful. She asked permission the way Amos had asked Rune permission on the road, not as a formality, but as a boundary that mattered. Nora arrived first, wearing her blue coat and carrying photographs in an envelope. The pictures showed her roof still covered in tarp, months after a county notice claimed repair funds had been issued. She apologized 3 times for the quality of the images. June told her blurry truth was still truth. Warren Pike came next with his old firefighter coat, smelling faintly of smoke and pine. He brought a receipt claiming an insulated dog shelter had been completed on his property. He also brought a photograph of the actual shelter, scrap wood, plastic sheeting, and an old horse blanket nailed over the windward side. "It kept him warm enough," Warren said, and looked embarrassed by the poverty of the sentence. Grant felt something old move inside him. Not pity. He hated pity too much to hand it to another man. Recognition. The shame of being forced to be grateful for what should never have been denied. 2 more townspeople came in the afternoon, a former road crew mechanic whose temporary housing voucher had vanished into processing, and a quiet woman who fostered retired rescue dogs after the fire and had been marked in the system as reimbursed for supplies she had bought with borrowed money. They did not stay long. June took copies, wrote receipts, thanked them without making speeches. Mabel brought her diner ledger after lunch. It was a thick notebook with a red cover, grease stains on the corners, and names written in columns beside coffee, pie, eggs, stew, and occasional judgments disguised as menu notes. "This is not gossip," she announced. "This is civic memory." June opened it with the solemnity of a judge examining a sacred text. "You recorded county employees meeting with contractors?" "I recorded who ate what, where they sat, and who was too cheap to tip," Mabel said. "If corruption wants pancakes, it becomes my business." The ledger showed dates after the wildfire. Corbin Wexler meeting men Mabel did not recognize. Marla Voss sitting twice in the back booth with a contractor who paid cash and kept his coat collar up. Mabel had written in the margin, "Smiled too much, ordered nothing sweet." June looked at the note. "Legally irrelevant," she said. "Morally damning," Mabel replied. "Possibly useful for timeline." "I'll accept that." As the evidence grew, so did a name, Marla Voss. She appeared on county letters, press clippings, recovery committee notices, contractor approvals, and public statements printed from an old article Nora had saved. In the photograph, Marla stood in front of a burned hillside wearing a cream coat and a soft smile, one hand over her heart, as if she had personally promised the mountain it would be whole again. Her words beneath the picture spoke of rebuilding, prioritizing impact, maximizing community recovery. June read the article and sighed. Whenever someone says maximizing impact, ask who gets hit. Delia pointed at a contractor name repeated across several documents. This address is empty. I know that road. There's no office there. Warren leaned closer. Storage lots, mostly. Grant stood apart from the table, arms crossed, listening more than speaking. Rune lay near him, eyes tracking every person who entered, every paper that moved, every shift in Grant's breathing. The forge had become crowded, but Rune did not seem uneasy. He seemed purposeful, as though the circle had widened and he had adjusted his watch accordingly. Late in the afternoon, Corbin came back. No phone call, no appointment. His county sedan stopped outside, and this time his boots did not stay clean. Mud marked the sides, though he still walked as if offended by it. He entered the forge and froze for half a second at the sight of June Calder scanning documents at Amos's table. That half second was enough. June looked up over her glasses. "Mr. Wexler," Corbin recovered quickly. "I don't believe we've met." "No," June said. "You'd remember." Mabel whispered to Nora, "I may propose." Corbin turned to Grant, choosing the target he thought most likely to move. "Mr. Ashby, I left those documents for your review, not for public circulation." "They're my copies," Grant said. "They involve county processes." "They involve my name," June capped her pen, "and potentially several other names, all shared voluntarily by their owners. Choose your next sentence with care." Corbin's polite mask thinned. He looked at Delia. "You work for the clinic. You should know better than to involve yourself in records outside your role." Delia's face remained calm. "I haven't accessed clinic records. I've helped people contact counsel and gather documents they chose to share." "Optics still matter." Amos stepped away from the anvil. "So does truth, though I understand it's less fashionable." Corbin looked around the forge, the tools, the papers, the townspeople, the old bell under its cloth. And something sharper entered his voice. "Mr. Hardy, I would hate to see this place become a problem." The room went quiet. Corbin continued. "After the fire, many older structures were flagged for safety review. Open flame, coal storage, aging electrical, public access. Sometimes all it takes is one report for the county to take a closer look." Mabel's face lost its humor. Warren straightened. Delia went very still. Amos did not answer right away. He only looked at Corbin with the tired patience of a man who had watched boys mistake position for strength. Then Rune rose. Slowly. He moved in front of Amos. The German shepherd's body tightened from nose to tail, not wild, not loud, but absolute. He did not bare his teeth. He did not need to. His black saddle lifted with each breath, the golden streak between his eyes bright in the forge light. He stood between the old blacksmith and the county man, as if a line had been drawn in iron filings at their feet. Grant felt the moment strike him clean through. Rune was not protecting only him now. Somewhere between the storm road, the bitter coffee, the bell, the old letters, and Amos's stubborn hands, the dog had decided that the blacksmith belonged inside the circle. Grant stepped forward and stood beside Rune. He did not raise his voice. That would have given Corbin too much. "You came to the wrong forge," Grant said. "Iron doesn't soften here because you whisper at it." Amos's mouth twitched. Mabel whispered, "Oh, that was good." Corbin looked at Grant, then at Rune, then at June. For the first time, the clean shape of his confidence showed a dent. "This isn't over," he said. June put a sticky note on one document. "That is the first accurate thing you've said today." Corbin left without another word. At the door, he paused. His gaze shifted past the forge, beyond the row of houses, toward the old mining station at the back of town. It was quick, barely a glance, but Amos saw it. Grant saw Amos see it. The county sedan pulled away. For several breaths, nobody spoke. Then Amos walked to the window and stared toward the dark outline of the old rail building beyond the snow. "What?" Grant asked. Amos rubbed one soot-dark thumb along the edge of his palm. "After the fire," he said, "county crews ran out of dry space. Records were everywhere. Church basement, school gym, old station office." Delia stepped closer. "The mining station?" "Storage warehouse behind it," Amos said, "before they moved things into the new system." June's eyes sharpened. "Original intake records?" "Some," Amos said. "Maybe. I fought the county when they wanted to tear the place down." "Historic structure," I said. "Last piece of the old rail line." Marla hated that. Mabel crossed her arms. "You mean your sentimental mule-headedness may have preserved evidence?" Amos gave her a side-eye. "You're welcome." Grant looked toward the window. Snow fell over the old mining road, soft and white, hiding tracks almost as soon as they were made. Delia's voice was low. "If the originals are there, they could show what people were approved for before the records changed." June began placing documents back into folders. "Could, not will. We do this carefully." Amos looked at the forge fire, then at the old bell beneath its cloth, then at Grant. "Maybe the devil isn't in the computer," he said. "Maybe it's sitting in a moldy box under that old warehouse roof." Rune stood at Grant's side, ears lifted toward the sleeping town. And for the first time, Grant did not think of leaving when the truck was fixed. He thought of a box under old timber, a name in a ledger, a daughter holding her father's letters, a dog standing guard beside a blacksmith. Outside, the snow kept falling over Silverpine, bright as mercy, quiet as a secret not yet ready to confess. The old mining station stood behind Silverpine like a memory no one had agreed to keep, yet no one had managed to bury. By afternoon, sunlight lay across its broken windows in pale bars. Snow covered the abandoned rails, smoothing the rust and rotten ties until the tracks looked almost holy, as if some forgotten train might still arrive carrying miners, mail sacks, and all the years the town had lost. Dry weeds pushed through the snow along the platform, thin and gray, like the whiskers of ancient mountain gods sleeping beneath the earth. Behind the station, lower and wider, crouched the storage warehouse. Its roof sagged slightly toward the burned hillside. One wall still wore dark stains from the wildfire 2 years before. The hill above it had once been thick with pine roots, Amos said, roots that held the slope like fingers gripping a blanket. Now many of those trees were gone. Snowmelt ran through the exposed soil during the day, then froze at night. The hailstorm had not helped. Nothing did lately. "Pretty place," Mabel Cross said, standing beside Grant's truck with a steel thermos under one arm and a cast-iron skillet in her other hand. June Calder looked at the skillet. "Is that necessary?" Mabel tightened her grip. "Depends on how persuasive the truth needs to be." "No one is persuading anyone with cookware," June said. "Then I brought snacks for nothing." Amos Hardy stood near the warehouse steps, his old canvas coat buttoned wrong, a tool roll tucked beneath one arm. His white hair had escaped his cap in several directions, giving him the look of a prophet who had argued with the wind and lost only by choice. "Mabel stays outside." Mabel turned on him. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me." "I have known this building longer than Grant has known that truck." "And the building likes you so much it may try to hug you with a beam," Amos said. "Outside." Warren Pike, tall and lean in his faded firefighter coat, nodded toward the hillside. "He's right. Ground above the rear wall is soft. If anything shifts, we need someone at the road who can call it in and yell loud enough for heaven to file a complaint." Mabel looked at Grant. "You going to let them talk to me like I'm decorative?" Grant glanced at the skillet. "I don't think anyone here believes you're decorative." Rune gave a soft huff from beside him. Mabel pointed at the dog. "At least the officer in charge understands me." Rune did not wag, but his amber eyes rested on her long enough to make the old woman smile despite herself. They had not come here in a rush. June had insisted on that, and June Calder's insistence had the weight of courthouse stone. The warehouse was still listed as part of Silverpine's protected historic mining corridor. It had not been sealed by the county, though it had been marked as unstable in an old inspection note Amos had saved because, in his words, the county liked losing useful paper and keeping stupid paper. Warren had confirmed that during the chaotic weeks after the wildfire, boxes of recovery intake records had been moved through the station office and into the warehouse when the school gym flooded and the church basement filled. Mabel remembered dates. Of course she did. She had dates for pies, funerals, blizzards, arguments, and every public official who ordered eggs over medium but meant over easy. In her red diner ledger, the week after the fire showed Corbin Wexler sitting twice with Marla Voss and a contractor tied to the county's record digitization project. That did not prove anything by itself, June kept saying. But it pointed. And pointing, in a town buried under snow and polite lies, mattered. June lifted her phone and began recording. "For the record," she said, voice clear, "present are Amos Hardy, Property and Preservation Petitioner for the Silverpine Mining Station Corridor; Grant Ashby, Claimant; Delia Hardy, Witness and Medical Professional not acting in a records capacity; Warren Pike, Witness to Post-Fire Temporary Storage; and myself, June Calder, Legal Advisor. Mabel Cross is outside voluntarily." "Under protest," Mabel called. "Under protest," June added, without changing tone. Grant stood a little apart from the group, one gloved hand resting on Rune's collar. The old leather was dark beneath his fingers, the metal tag Amos had mended catching dull light. Rune's ears were forward, not fixed on one thing, but moving gently, gathering the place. The dog did not like the warehouse. That was not unusual. The place smelled of damp paper, old soot, mice, rust, and frozen wood. But there was something else beneath it, something that made Rune's nose lift and his body settle into the alert stillness Grant had learned not to ignore. "You smell it too, huh?" Grant murmured. Rune looked at the door. Amos knelt in front of the old lock. It was thick, blackened near the top, and crusted with rust. He unrolled his tools on a square of canvas, narrow picks, a small hammer, a hooked iron piece he had shaped himself, and a thin wedge polished by use. June lowered the phone slightly. "Can you open it without damaging the door?" Amos gave her the wounded look of a man whose entire religion had been insulted. "I'm a blacksmith, not a raccoon with ambition." Mabel snorted from near the road. The old man worked slowly. He did not force the lock. He listened to it. Grant could see that. Amos pressed, eased, tapped, waited, then shifted the angle of the wedge by a hair. The lock complained in little red flakes of rust. After several minutes, something inside gave a tired click. Amos stood, one hand on his lower back. "Doors open." June angled the phone toward the lock. No visible forced damage. "Thank you for narrating my genius," Amos said. "Don't get used to it." The door groaned inward. Cold air breathed out. It was not the clean cold of snow. It was cellar cold, paper cold, a long trap dampness that carried ash and old wood and metal gone sour with age. Grant stepped in first, though Warren caught his sleeve. "Slow," Warren said. "Floor may not forgive confidence." Grant nodded once. Rune went ahead of him. Not far, just enough. Inside, the warehouse stretched wider than it had looked from the road. Shelves stood in rows, some leaning, some collapsed. Old mining equipment sat beneath tarps stiff with dust. Crates were stacked near the west wall. A wheeled desk lay on its side, one drawer hanging open, like a tongue. Light fell through roof gaps and broken windows, striping the floor in silver and shadow. Delia pulled her flashlight from her coat pocket. The beam moved across labels, old rope, cracked boards, a calendar from years ago, a pile of county storage boxes softened by moisture. June kept recording. "Everyone stays where the floor is solid," Warren said. "No hero steps." Mabel called from outside. "I heard that, and I resent being excluded from the category." "Nobody said your name," Warren replied. "You thought it." Grant would have smiled if the air had not been sitting so heavily in his chest. Rune stopped at the edge of a patch of flooring where the boards looked only slightly darker than the rest. To a careless eye, nothing was wrong. Rune lowered his nose, then looked back at Grant. Grant crouched and touched one board with his gloved fingers. Soft, he shifted his weight back. "Bad floor." Warren came over, bent, and nodded. "Water got under it." Delia marked the spot with a strip of orange tape from her bag. Rune moved again, slowly now, reading the place in a language older than records. Not hunting, not searching the way men thought of searching. He followed damp, smoke, old paper, rust, and perhaps the faintest memory of frightened animals and hurried hands from 2 winters before. His ears tilted toward a row near the rear wall. There, several boxes sat beneath a tarp, scorched along one edge. June stepped closer and read the label aloud. "Wildfire Recovery Intake. Veterans. Animals. Temporary housing." Nobody spoke for a moment. The words were plain, bureaucratic, almost boring. Yet Grant felt them land like stones in a basin. Delia's flashlight trembled once, then steadied. Amos muttered, "Well, I'll be cursed." June looked at him. Later, carefully. They did not tear into the boxes like treasure hunters. June photographed each label first. Warren checked the shelving. Amos held one side steady while Grant lifted the tarp. Delia handed June gloves from her medical bag, because of course she had thought of that. Mabel, from outside, demanded regular updates and threatened to come in if no one described things with proper drama. They opened the first box. Inside were folders swollen slightly from moisture, but readable. Intake sheets, temporary aid requests, evacuation support forms, property loss summaries. Some pages bore old water stains, some had smoke along the edges. But names remained, dates remained, signatures remained. It was not the whole truth. June said that immediately. "This is intake material. It doesn't prove final payment by itself." "No magic box," Grant said. "No magic anything," June replied. "But sometimes the first record tells you what later records tried to become." They began comparing. Nora Vale's name appeared with an approved roof repair assistance amount larger than the notice she had received. Warren Pike's form listed animal structure replacement recommended and approved for follow-up. The quiet woman who fostered rescue dogs appeared beside a supply assistance category that had later been marked closed. Other names emerged, some familiar, some belonging to people who had left Silverpine after the fire. Then Delia found Grant's folder. She did not hand it to him immediately. That told him enough. "Give it here," he said. Her eyes met his. "You don't have to read it standing up." "I do." She gave him the folder. Grant opened it on a crate beneath the weak winter light. Rune stood beside him, shoulder touching his leg. The intake form listed his cabin address. Loss category, total structure loss. Temporary housing status, unresolved. Companion animal, Rune, German Shepherd, evacuation shelter transfer logged. Recommended assistance, temporary lodging, document replacement, animal support reimbursement, follow-up case review. The approved preliminary amount was more than Corbin had offered. Far more. Grant stared at the number until it stopped looking like money and began to look like weather, like heat. Like nights he had spent folded into the front seat while Rune slept across the bench to keep both of them warm. Like a cheap motel he could not afford. Like copies of documents he had paid for twice. Like a dog shelter fee he had never understood and never been reimbursed. Below that, in later handwriting, someone had marked the case. Closed. Recipient accepted local settlement. Grant read it again. There was a signature line beneath it. The name looked like his if someone had only seen his signature from across a room and guessed the rest. His body went still in a way that made Rune lean harder against him. "I didn't sign this," Grant said. His voice was quiet. June came beside him and did not touch the page until he nodded. She looked at the signature, then at the date. "We document, we compare, we don't accuse in the room." Mabel called, "I can't accuse from outside." "No," June and Delia said together. Grant's jaw worked. He wanted the fury to rise cleanly. Fury was easier than what actually came. What came was a hollowing, a cold certainty that while he had been sleeping in his truck and telling himself he needed nothing from anyone, someone had used his absence like an empty chair and signed him out of help. Rune lowered his head and pressed his muzzle briefly against the back of Grant's hand. Not asking. Anchoring. That was the moment Grant understood the warehouse was not only a place of records, it was a place of stolen weather. Roofs not repaired. Dog shelters not built. Motel rooms never paid for. Forms that had turned real cold into administrative closure. He looked at Delia. She said nothing. She did not need to. Above them, something clicked in the roof. Warren's head snapped up. Everyone froze. For one breath, there was only the old building settling. Then hail began. It struck lightly at first, scattered taps across the roof. Then faster. Then harder. The sound spread over the warehouse in sharp fingers. Light dimmed as the sky changed beyond the broken windows. Warren moved toward the rear wall. "We need to leave." June was already gathering documents back into the folders. "Originals stay organized. Copies later." "No," Warren said, sharper. "Now." Grant looked toward the back of the warehouse. Water had begun running under the rear threshold, dark and quick, carrying grit from the hillside. Amos swore softly. Snowmelt. The hail hammered harder. Mabel shouted from outside, her voice muffled. "Weather's turning mean." Warren stepped toward the rear corner, listened, then looked at the wall with an expression Grant trusted immediately. "Move," Warren said. "Everybody out. Front door. Stay left of the bad floor." They moved. Not running at first. Running broke boards. Warren led, June clutching folders against her coat. Delia behind her. Amos with his tool roll. Grant waiting half a beat too long because his eyes had found the box with his name again. Rune barked once. Grant turned. A sound came from the hillside behind the warehouse. Not thunder. Earth. A low, wet shift, as if something huge had rolled over in its sleep. The rear wall shuddered. "Grant!" Delia shouted. A section of shelving near the back tipped forward. Boxes slid. A beam cracked overhead with a sound like a tree splitting in winter. Grant moved toward the door. Rune was beside him, then ahead, then suddenly not. The dog spun back. Grant saw the beam coming before his body obeyed. Rune hit him hard in the thigh and hip, not enough to knock him flat, but enough to shove him sideways toward the clearer path. The beam struck the floor where Grant had been. The impact snapped shelving and threw up a burst of dust, paper, and cold air. Amos grabbed Grant's jacket and hauled him toward the door. The rear portion of the roof gave way. Not the whole warehouse. Not some grand collapse that swallowed the world. Only the back section, the weakest part beneath the burned hillside. But it was enough. Wet soil, broken boards, and old shelves folded inward, filling the space with a roar that became a choking, muffled silence. Grant stumbled outside into white light and hail. Delia was there. June. Warren. Amos, one hand pressed against his shoulder, face tight with pain but upright. Mabel stood near the road, eyes wide, skillet forgotten in one hand. Grant turned back. Rune? No answer. He moved toward the doorway. Warren caught him. Wait! Grant shoved at him. Rune! Grant, stop. The front may still go. Grant heard him and did not hear him. The warehouse doorway breathed dust and cold mist. Inside, the rear was a broken, dark shape. Hail struck the roof and bounced off the threshold. Papers skidded across the floor like pale birds with wounded wings. Rune! Grant shouted. Something in the sound tore him open. The collapse echoed again in his skull, but it was no longer wood and hillside. It was another place, another impact, a hot wind, men shouting through grit, the smell of metal, smoke, dust, a hand on his chest, a voice telling him to stay awake. Caleb's voice. Rune's bark became something farther away, something lost behind a wall of sound. The world narrowed. His breathing went wrong. He tried to step forward and could not feel the ground properly. Snow became sand. Hail became sparks. The broken warehouse became a doorway into years he had nailed shut and called discipline. Then Amos was in front of him. The old blacksmith seized Grant's jacket with his good hand and pulled his face toward the beam of Warren's flashlight. "Look at me," Amos said. Grant could not. Amos shook him once. Not hard. Enough. Look at the light. Grant's eyes found the white circle of the flashlight trembling against Amos's coat. "There," Amos said. His own voice was strained but steady. "That's here. That's now. Snow under your boots. My ugly face in front of you. Mabel about to insult somebody. Delia breathing. Warren thinking. June already planning how to make this someone's problem." Mabel's voice cracked from behind them. "I can insult on request." Grant dragged in air. It hurt. Good. Hurt belonged to now. Amos leaned closer. "Listen to me. That dog has not left you once. Not in a storm, not in a truck, not in whatever rooms your head drags you back to. Don't you leave him now by disappearing inside yourself." Grant's hands shook. He forced them open. "Rune," he said, but at this time not as a shout. As a rope, everyone went still. Warren angled the flashlight into the broken rear of the warehouse. For a moment, nothing answered. Then, beneath the fallen shelving and wet timber, from somewhere inside the dark, came a sound. Small, rough, alive, a low whine. Grant stopped breathing. Delia covered her mouth with one gloved hand. Mabel whispered something that sounded like a prayer and a threat blended together. Rune whined again. Not loud, not free, but alive. Grant stepped toward the doorway, eyes locked on the dark gap beneath the collapsed shelves. This time Warren did not hold him back. He moved beside him. Amos stood on Grant's other side, shoulder hurt, jaw clenched, fire in his old eyes. June lifted her phone, already calling for help. The hail kept beating the broken roof. The burned hill groaned softly above them. Inside the warehouse, under wet wood and fallen records, Rune was still breathing. And Grant Ashby, who had almost left Silverpine before dawn, stood at the mouth of the old warehouse and understood that leaving was no longer one of the roads before him. The news ran through Silverpine faster than the old church bell ever had. Rune was trapped. That was all it took. No one phrased it as a meeting. No one waited for permission from the county, a committee, or some polite voice behind a desk. Mabel Cross made the first calls from the roadside, one hand wrapped around her phone, the other still gripping the cast-iron skillet she had forgotten to put down. Warren Pike radioed 2 men from the volunteer road crew. Delia Hardy called the clinic for blankets, lights, and basic supplies. June Calder called the state inspector's office, then called them again when the first person tried to transfer her. By the time the hail weakened into hard snow, headlights were already crawling up the old mining road. Silverpine came in layers, a pickup with a winch, a county plow driven by a man who owed Mabel for 12 breakfasts and suddenly seemed eager to repay society. Nora Vale arrived in her blue coat, with dry blankets bundled under one arm, moving carefully but with the fierce purpose of a woman who had once loved a shepherd and had never quite stopped listening for his paws on the floor. 2 road workers brought shovels, pry bars, and lanterns. Someone else brought rope. Someone brought a thermos that was not Amos's coffee, which Mabel declared the first sign heaven remains involved. They did not come because Rune was a heroic idea. They came because Rune had become real to them. He had stood still for Nora when she touched the place between his ears and remembered the dog she had lost after the fire. He had barked once in the forge when a hot iron slid too close to Amos's boot, the warning sharp enough to save the old man from a bad burn and leave Amos pretending he had planned to move anyway. He had lain outside Mabel's diner like a 4-legged officer without a badge, drawing in customers who claimed they only wanted coffee, but somehow always asked if the big shepherd was on duty. He had stood between Corbin Wexler and Amos when a threat came dressed as a safety review. So when people heard Rune was under the warehouse roof, they did not come to rescue a stranger's dog. They came for the shape loyalty had taken in their town. Grant Ashby stood at the warehouse entrance, snow collecting on his shoulders, one hand braced against the splintered doorframe. Inside, the rear of the building sagged into darkness. Broken shelving, wet soil, old boards, and collapsed roofing had made a low, crooked cave where the back wall used to be. Somewhere beneath it, Rune was alive. Grant had heard him twice, not loudly, not clearly enough to know how badly he was trapped, but enough. A sound could become a rope if a man held onto it hard enough. "Grant," Delia's voice came beside him. He turned. She had tied her hair tighter, and snow glittered on her lashes. She was not trying to look fearless. That helped. Fearless people made bad decisions. Delia looked afraid and useful. "I need you to listen," she said. "When we get him out, he'll be cold, maybe stiff, maybe panicked. We keep him warm, we don't crowd him, and we don't move him rough unless the structure forces us." Grant nodded. "I know you want to crawl in." "Yes?" "You can't. Not until Warren says it's stable enough." Grant looked back into the broken warehouse. Another part of him, the older part, would have ignored her. It would have treated caution as weakness and urgency as command. But that part had nearly vanished inside the noise of the collapse. Amos had dragged him back with a flashlight beam and a sentence hard enough to hold. "Rune never left you. Don't leave him by disappearing inside yourself." Grant swallowed. "Tell me what to do." Delia's face changed, just slightly. Not relief, respect. "Stay where he can hear you." That he could do. Warren Pike took charge of the first assessment. His old firefighter coat was dusted with snow and grit, the rescue whistle at his chest tapping lightly whenever he moved. He crouched near the entrance, shining a flashlight across the fallen beams. "No one steps on the left side," he said. "That shelf is holding weight. That beam there is cracked but resting. We need to clear from the front and brace before we pull anything big." One of the road workers asked, "What about the rear wall?" Warren listened. Everyone fell quiet. The burned hillside above the warehouse gave a faint wet creak beneath the snow. "We don't trust the rear wall," Warren said. "We work like it has a bad temper." Mabel nodded grimly. "I've known men like that." June Calder stood behind them, phone in one hand, document bag in the other. Her gray parka was streaked with damp from the storm, and her narrow glasses had fogged at the edges, but her voice remained as crisp as folded paper. "I have the photographed intake records backed up," she said. "Copies are going to the state inspector's office now. The originals recovered so far are sealed in my bag with chain of custody notes." Mabel stared at her. "Rune is under a building, and you're doing paperwork?" June did not flinch. "Rune deserves rescue. The people whose names were in that building deserve proof that survives tomorrow." For once, Mabel had no joke ready. Grant heard the words without turning from the dark. Proof that survives tomorrow. That was the kind of phrase he would once have hated. Too neat, too official. But now it landed differently. Maybe because June's hands were shaking just a little while she typed. Maybe because she was not using procedure to delay help, but to protect it from being buried again. Amos had vanished. Grant noticed suddenly. "Where's Amos?" Mabel pointed down the road. "Forge!" Grant's head snapped toward her. "He said if anyone let you crawl in before he got back, he'd haunt them while still alive," Mabel said. Less than 15 minutes later, Amos's moss-green truck came grinding back up the road, engine protesting like an old mule asked to attend church. He parked crookedly, climbed out with his jaw clenched, and carried an iron pry bar, 3 steel wedges, and a long, half-finished brace, still dark from the forge. Delia moved toward him. "Your shoulder." "My shoulder is 74 years old and dramatic," Amos said. "Ignore it." "That's not how shoulders work." "It's how mine works." He handed the brace to Warren. "Can we use this?" Warren turned it over in his hands. "Where did you get this?" "Made it." "Just now?" "Didn't have time to order one from a catalog." Warren looked at the iron piece, then at Amos. "It'll do." Amos grunted, which in his language meant both satisfaction and "stop admiring me before I become unbearable." They worked carefully. No music, no speeches, no heroic chaos. Just the hard, cold discipline of many hands doing small things correctly. The road workers shoveled snow and loose soil away from the threshold. Warren directed the placement of the brace beneath a cracked roof beam. Amos set the steel wedges, tapping them into place with controlled blows that sounded different from forge work. Smaller, duller, more urgent. Delia laid blankets near the entrance and checked the space where Rune would be brought out. June kept her phone recording from a safe distance after Warren told her where to stand. Mabel poured coffee into cups and forced them into hands before fingers went numb. Grant lay flat near the opening, close enough to see into the darkness, but not far enough to shift weight where Warren had forbidden it. "Rune," he called. His voice came out rough. No answer. He closed his eyes for one beat, then opened them and lowered his tone. "Hey, boy, you hear me?" A faint scrape answered. Grant put his cheek nearly against the cold floorboards. "You remember Amos's coffee? You can't leave me alone with that. That would be cruel." "Pretty sure there are rules." A sound came from the debris. Small, Grant breathed. "Mabel says you're better looking than half the men in town. I didn't argue, because she had a skillet." Behind him, Mabel whispered, "Smart man." Grant kept his eyes on the black gap. "Delia's mad too," he said. "Not loud mad. Worse, clinic mad. If you make her patch both of us up tonight, she'll use the boring voice." Delia, crouched with a blanket nearby, said softly, "That is accurate." The shape beneath the debris shifted. Not much, enough to send a whisper of old dust into the beam of light. Warren leaned in. "I see fur." Grant's whole body went still. "Where?" "Under that desk frame, back right. He's in a pocket." A pocket. A space, a chance. The old steel desk, fallen sideways beneath the collapsed shelving, had created a narrow shelter between 2 broken beams. Rune was wedged partly beneath it, surrounded by splintered wood and damp boxes. His black and gold coat was dulled with dust. One ear moved when Grant called again. "I'm here," Grant said. Rune gave a low whine. Not pain alone. Recognition. Grant pressed his hand to the floorboards. I know, boy." They did not pull him at once. That was the hardest part. Warren made them clear the wood around the desk frame first. Amos and one road worker used the iron brace to lift a narrow beam a few inches, while another set wedges beneath it. Delia kept saying, "Slow," not because anyone wanted speed less, but because slow was how they got him out alive. Time became strange. Snow fell. Hands worked. Breath steamed. A lantern flickered against the old warehouse wall, making everyone's shadows move like tired giants. The town had gathered behind the line Warren marked in the snow. No one pushed forward. No one demanded drama. They waited with the solemnity people usually saved for church, courtrooms, and hospital corridors. Grant kept talking, not orders, not commands, fragments. "Remember the motel in Pueblo with the broken heater? You stole both blankets." A faint thump. "You did? Don't deny it." Rune's tail, trapped somewhere in shadow, moved once against a box. Mabel wiped at her face and blamed snow. Grant smiled and hated how close it was to breaking. "Remember the cabin?" he said, quieter. "Before the fire, that corner by the stove. You used to pretend you were asleep until I opened jerky?" Rune breathed loudly through his nose. Grant's voice nearly failed. "We're getting you out." The brace shifted. Amos hissed through his teeth. Delia looked at him. "Shoulder?" "Pride," he said. "Same treatment?" "Worse prognosis." At last, the opening widened. Warren crawled forward just far enough to loop a soft strap around the desk frame, not Rune. Amos held the wedge. Grant reached in as far as Delia allowed, fingers finding damp fur at Rune's neck. "Easy," Delia said. "Let him come toward your voice." Grant swallowed. "Rune, come on." Rune tried. The first movement was clumsy. His front paws scraped against wet boards. The desk frame caught at his shoulder. Grant wanted to pull, but Delia's hand landed on his arm, firm. "Let Warren clear it." Warren shifted a broken plank. Amos tapped a wedge 1 inch deeper. "Again," Warren said. Grant leaned close. "Come on, boy. One more." Rune dragged himself forward. Then his head emerged into the light. Dust clung to his muzzle. The flame-colored streak between his eyes was dulled but visible. His amber eyes found Grant's face, and for 1 second the whole broken warehouse, the snow, the documents, the old wrongs, and every watching person vanished. There was only the dog who had refused to leave. Grant got both hands around Rune's head and held him as Delia guided the rest of his body free. Rune was cold, shaking, streaked with mud and dust, but breathing. A few shallow scrapes marked his legs and shoulder, nothing severe, nothing that needed panic. Delia checked him quickly, hands steady. "He's cold and exhausted," she said. "Some scrapes. I don't see anything that says we move him fast. Blanket." Nora was there before the word finished. She wrapped the first blanket over Rune with hands that trembled. Mabel added another. Someone behind them let out a breath that might have been a sob. Warren sat back in the snow and covered his eyes for a moment. Grant pressed his forehead into Rune's wet fur. He did not hide it when the tears came. He had hidden too much already. No one laughed. No one looked away in embarrassment. Even Mabel, blessedly, did not make a joke at first. She only knelt beside them and tucked the blanket under Rune's chest. Then, because Mercy and Mabel Cross always wore boots and carried sarcasm, she whispered, "All right, you two tragic gentlemen. Try not to soak all my good wool." Grant let out something between a laugh and a broken breath. Rune, wrapped like a muddy king, closed his eyes and leaned into him. The rescue could have ended there. For Grant, it nearly did. But Warren, who had gone back to check whether the brace would hold until the area was cleared, called from near the broken shelving. "June." His voice had changed. June came forward immediately. "What?" Warren pointed beneath a collapsed shelf, where a corner of dark metal showed through wet paper and soil. "That isn't a storage box." Amos leaned in, squinting. His face shifted with recognition. "Well," he said, "that's old." The object was a heavy metal case, black with age and soot, its edges sealed tight, one handle bent but intact. Amos brushed mud from the lid with his glove. "Mine records," he said. "They used these for maps, claims, payroll, fire-resistant, heavy as sin and twice as stubborn. June photographed it before anyone moved it." "Can we lift it safely?" she asked. Warren checked the shelf. Amos tested the weight. Grant, still kneeling beside Rune, looked up but didn't move until Delia nodded that Rune was stable. Together, Warren and Amos eased the case free. The latch resisted. Amos gave it one look and said, "I know." "You've had a hard day," Mabel whispered. "Is he talking to the box?" Delia said. "Yes." "Should I be concerned?" "No more than usual." Amos used one of his small tools to work the latch open. It gave with a stubborn click. Inside were folders wrapped in old waxed paper. June's breath caught despite herself. Transfer logs, approval lists, early disbursement sheets, committee notes. Several pages bore original signatures, not digital copies. The documents did not solve the entire case. June said so even then, because truth was her trade and she refused to oversell it. But they mattered. They connected intake forms to approved amounts to transfer requests, transfer requests to accounts and contractors whose names had begun to appear in the other records. It was not the whole chain, but it was a lock clicking into place. Mabel looked at the papers, then at Rune, wrapped in blankets. "So," she said quietly, "the dog dug up the truth by getting stuck on top of it." June did not smile, but something near her eyes softened. "Let's say the truth was recovered during a rescue effort." "Fine. Ruin poetry." Headlights appeared down the road. A county sedan. Corbin Wexler stepped out into the snow a few minutes later, his coat buttoned tight, his polished boots finally losing their battle with Silverpine mud. His face was pale with cold or calculation. "What happened here?" he asked. Nobody answered immediately. His eyes moved from the damaged warehouse to Rune in blankets, then to the metal case near June's feet. "I'll need those documents turned over to the county for proper handling," he said. June zipped her document bag very slowly. "No," Corbin blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," she repeated. "The recovered materials have been photographed, logged, and copied. The relevant records have already been transmitted to the State Inspector's office. Originals will be preserved through counsel until proper instructions are issued by an authority not implicated in the chain under review." Corbin's mouth tightened. "You don't have the authority to—" "Finish that sentence," June said, "and make my afternoon." Mabel stepped beside Nora. Warren stood beside Amos. Delia stood beside Grant. Rune, still wrapped in blankets, lifted his head just enough to look at Corbin. That did more than any speech. Corbin looked around and found no isolated man to pressure, no old blacksmith alone in his forge, no tired veteran with a pen in his hand, no town willing to pretend clean shoes meant clean intentions. Amos placed one broad hand on the metal case. "Iron's hot," he said. "Best strike clean." Mabel raised an eyebrow. Amos sighed. "Fine. Paper's hot, too." Grant looked at him. For the first time that day, he laughed without breaking. Corbin left with no papers. He did not slam his car door. Men like Corbin rarely slammed anything. They preserved the shape of dignity, even when dignity had already fled the scene. When the sedan disappeared, Amos did something no one expected. He walked to his truck, reached into the back, and took out the burned church bell. It was smaller than it had looked in the forge, blackened, cracked, its rim still uneven where fire had warped it. Amos must have loaded it when he returned for the brace and wedges, though no one had noticed. "What are you doing?" Delia asked. "Testing a theory." With Warren's help, Amos hung the bell from a temporary hook on the warehouse porch beam that still held. It looked strange there, this scarred old thing beneath a broken roof, above snow trampled by half the town. Amos took a small hammer from his coat. He struck the bell lightly. The sound that came out was not beautiful. It was rough, hoarse, uneven, a cracked note with smoke still trapped in it. But it carried. Across the road, over the abandoned rails, through the falling snow. The people of Silverpine grew quiet. Grant sat beside Rune, one hand resting on the dog's blanket. The old sound moved through him, not like a command, not like a warning, but like a wounded voice discovering it could still be heard. Amos lowered the hammer. "Not right yet," he said. Mabel wiped her cheek. "No, but loud enough." Grant looked down at Rune. The German shepherd's eyes were half closed now, tired but calm. His head rested near Grant's knee, exactly where it belonged. Around them stood Delia, Amos, June, Warren, Nora, Mabel, and the others. Not a crowd, not a rescue scene anymore, but something closer to a circle. For years, Grant had believed broken things either stayed broken or got thrown away. Silverpine, stubborn old town that it was, seemed determined to argue. The bell's cracked voice faded into the snow. Grant kept his hand on Rune's warm neck and understood, quietly, that some things did not lose their voice forever. Sometimes they were only waiting for patient hands, the right fire, and someone willing to strike the first honest note. The state investigation did not arrive with trumpets. It came with phone calls, requests for copies, interviews scheduled in rooms that smelled of paper and coffee, and men and women in winter coats walking through Silverpine with clipboards tucked under their arms. There were no grand speeches in the town square, no dramatic arrests beneath falling snow, no single moment when the mountain opened its mouth and declared the truth. Truth, June Calder said, rarely behaved that beautifully. "Truth usually comes wearing ugly shoes," she told Mabel one morning at the diner. "But if you keep it warm and make copies, it gets where it needs to go." Mabel considered that over a plate of eggs. "I prefer truth with pie." "You prefer everything with pie." "That is why I am emotionally stable." The first official notice came 2 weeks after Rune was pulled from the warehouse. Marla Voss had been suspended pending review of wildfire recovery funds. The language in the letter was careful, polished, and bloodless. It mentioned administrative irregularities, improper routing, unresolved disbursement questions, and third-party contractor review. It did not mention Nora Vale's blue tarp. It did not mention Warren Pike's dog sleeping behind scrapboards and an old horse blanket. It did not mention Grant Ashby in a frozen truck, holding a letter that said he had received help he had never seen. But Silverpine knew how to read between official lines. The town had lived between lines for years. Corbin Wexler was removed from the county's Veterans Recovery Program while investigators reviewed his signatures, emails, approvals, and settlement packets. He did not vanish like a villain chased from a fairy tale. He remained painfully human, which somehow made it worse. A man with clean shoes and frightened eyes. A man who had once learned to call small compromises practical. A man who had let his fear of losing position turn him into a hinge in a door that shut on people who were already cold. Grant saw him once from across the street. Corbin stood outside the county office with a cardboard box in his hands, his polished boots dull with slush. For a second, their eyes met. Grant expected anger, maybe arrogance, maybe another careful sentence. Corbin only looked away. Grant did not feel triumph. That surprised him. He felt the heaviness of seeing a small man standing in the ruins of his own choices. It did not absolve Corbin. It did not soften what he had done. But it kept Grant from making him into a monster, and monsters were too easy. Monsters let systems pretend the rest of the machine was clean. Marla Voss was harder to see clearly because she had spent years hiding in plain sight. On paper, she had been the face of recovery, Cream coats, press photographs, soft smiles, phrases about rebuilding stronger and maximizing community impact. She knew how to make cruelty sound like management. She knew how to turn missing aid into reallocation, delay into process, and people into cases. But when June placed the warehouse records beside the intake forms, the copied letters, the diner ledger, the contractor addresses, and the transfer sheets from the metal case, Marla's pretty words began to lose their roof. Rain always found the crack eventually. The review did not fix everything at once. June warned them not to expect miracles, and Silverpine, being old enough to distrust miracles unless they came with receipts, believed her. Still, things began to move. Nora Vale received a confirmed repair grant before the next heavy snow. The day the roof crew arrived, she stood in her yard with both hands tucked into her blue coat sleeves, watching men carry shingles up a ladder. Rune sat beside her for nearly 20 minutes, solemn as a judge, while Nora rested her fingers lightly on his head. "He would have liked you," she told him. Rune leaned his shoulder against her knee. No one asked who he was. In Silverpine, some names were allowed to remain warm and unspoken. Warren Pike's support came through next. Not enough to erase 2 years of making do, but enough to build a proper insulated shelter for his old therapy dog. Warren tried to thank Grant, which made both men visibly uncomfortable, so Amos interrupted by telling Warren the first latch design was ugly and structurally insulting. That helped everyone. Several other local claims were reopened. A few families who had left town were contacted. Some received money, some received apologies that sounded too small for the size of the delay. But even small doors mattered after years of walls. Grant's VA file did not transform overnight. That mattered most to him, though he did not say it loudly. June connected him with an independent veterans assistance group outside the county system. They reviewed the coding errors, service records, missing documentation, and the wildfire-related losses that had tangled his local and federal files together like old wire. It would take time, more forms, more calls, more patience than Grant liked admitting he still possessed. But for the first time in years, the process did not feel like shouting into a snowfield. Someone had his name right. Someone knew Rune's name too. That felt absurdly important. Grant did not heal all at once either. Some nights he still woke before dawn with his heart moving too fast and his hands already clenched. Sometimes the hammer on Amos's anvil struck a pitch that made his chest tighten before memory could explain why. Sometimes he stood outside the forge in the cold and stared at the road out of town, not because he planned to leave, but because the old habit kept checking if the exit was still there. Rune always found him. The German shepherd had recovered from the warehouse with only shallow scrapes, bruised muscles, and the deep offense of being forced to rest. Delia had ordered limited activity. Rune obeyed for one afternoon, and then began supervising from a blanket near the forge door with the weary dignity of a retired general surrounded by incompetent recruits. Mabel brought him broth and called it medical stew. Delia said dogs did not need stew. Rune disagreed with his entire face. Amos said Rune was the only patient in Silverpine with better judgment than the nurse, and Delia threatened to check his shoulder again until he became respectful. Grant watched all this from the workbench one evening and realized something quietly dangerous. He had begun to expect voices, not demand them, not depend on them in a way that frightened him, but expect them the way a cold room expects fire after someone has cared for it long enough. That scared him more than loneliness had. Loneliness was clean. Hard, yes, but simple. A man alone had fewer places to fail, fewer people to disappoint, fewer names to carry. Silverpine was not clean. It was patched roofs, bad coffee, stubborn old men, women with ledgers, lawyers with fountain pens, nurses who saw too much, and dogs who blocked doors when men tried to vanish. It was messy. It was alive. One morning, Amos tossed him a pair of heavy gloves. Grant caught them. "What's this?" "Work." "I've been working." "You've been holding tools like they insulted your ancestors. Today you learn something." The task was the bell. The old church bell, blackened and cracked, lay on padded wood near the forge. Amos had spent evenings studying it, cleaning the soot from its scars, filing warped edges, tracing the crack with his thumb as if reading a language older than writing. He never promised to make it sound as it once had. He considered that disrespectful to both fire and time. "You don't make an old thing new by lying to it," Amos said. "You make it honest enough to stand." Grant started with simple work, holding, lifting, cleaning, passing tools before Amos snapped for them, then heating small brackets, filing rough edges, learning how iron changed color before it changed shape, learning that strength was not the same as force. He was slow. Amos made sure he knew it. "You hit like a man apologizing to the metal." Grant lowered the hammer. "You want me to hit harder?" "I want you to hit truer. Harder is what fools do when they are out of ideas." Grant tried again. The hammer fell. The sound was wrong. Amos winced. "That noise offended 3 generations of my family." Rune, lying near the door, lifted his head and looked at Grant. "Not you too," Grant said. Rune sighed and put his head down again. By the end of the week, Grant could hear the difference between metal resisting and metal yielding. Barely. Enough that Amos stopped insulting every strike and moved to every third strike, which Mabel called the old man's version of applause. Delia came by often, sometimes with clinic forms, sometimes with groceries Amos had forgotten he needed, sometimes with no reason she named. One afternoon, she brought a small wooden box tied with a faded cord. Grant knew before she opened it that it belonged to Caleb. The box held letters, some sent, some never mailed. A few photographs, a folded program from a school concert, a postcard from Montana. Delia did not hand it over like a relic. She set it between them on the workbench and let Grant decide whether to open it. He did. Slowly. Caleb's handwriting was slanted, impatient, alive. He wrote about rain that would not stop, boots that smelled like punishment, a daughter who asked questions too smart for bedtime, a father who believed every broken farm tool deserved a funeral, and men he had treated who apologized for surviving before they had even finished bleeding through their bandages. Grant read one line 3 times. "If someone makes it home because I held the door, I hope he walks through it. I hope he does not spend the rest of his life kneeling at the threshold." Grant closed his eyes. Delia sat beside him in silence. There are silences that accuse. This one did not. This one stayed. That evening, after the forge closed and the town lights came on, one by one beneath falling snow, Grant used the phone in Amos's back room to call Montana. He had written the number on a scrap of paper. June had helped find the correct contact through legal channels because June Calder believed even grief deserved proper verification. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered. Her voice was older than he expected and steadier than he deserved. Grant stood with one hand pressed against the wall. Rune lay outside the doorway, close enough to hear him breathe. Amos pretended to be busy in the forge. Delia had stepped outside. Mabel, for once in her life, had gone quiet. "Mrs. Hardy," Grant said, "my name is Grant Ashby." A pause. He almost stopped there. But Rune shifted outside the door, his collar tag giving one small sound against the floor. Grant continued. "Your son Caleb saved my life. Years ago. I should have called before now." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for regret to start sharpening itself. Then the woman breathed out. "I wondered if one of you would," she said. Grant closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "I didn't need an apology first," she said. "I needed to know one thing." "Yes, ma'am?" "Is the gift still walking under the sun?" Grant could not answer immediately. He looked through the doorway toward the forge. Amos at the anvil, Delia near the window, Rune's amber eyes watching him, the bell resting on its stand like a dark moon being taught to sing again. "Yes," he said at last, "it is." Then Caleb did not waste his hands. The call did not last long. She asked him where he was. He told her Silverpine. She laughed softly when he mentioned Amos, said the Hardy men had always been impossible around tools, and asked him to call again when he could. When Grant hung up, he did not feel free. Freedom was too large a word. He felt one chain loosen. Sometimes that was enough for one night. The day they raised the bell, Silverpine shone. Fresh snow had fallen before dawn, and the whole town seemed carved from light. The forge doors stood open. Amos had mounted a new bracket above the entrance, black iron shaped by his hands and Grant's clumsy help. Beneath it hung the old bell, cleaned but not disguised. Its fire marks remained. Its crack remained. Its voice would carry them both. There was no ceremony announced, but people came anyway. Nora in her blue coat, Warren with his old dog waiting in the truck cab, where it was warm. June with her document bag because apparently she trusted celebration only if evidence was nearby. Mabel with coffee, pie, and strict instructions that no one make a speech longer than a sneeze. Delia stood beside Amos, one hand tucked into her coat pocket, the other resting briefly on the small pendant at her neck. Rune lay near the forge door on a folded blanket, fully recovered enough to be offended by the blanket and wise enough to enjoy it anyway. He yawned during the most solemn part, which Mabel said proved he understood politics. Amos handed Grant the bell rope. Grant looked at it. "You sure?" "No," Amos said. "But do it anyway." Grant wrapped his hand around the rope. He thought of the storm road, the gray plastic bin, Corbin's clean shoes, Nora's roof, Warren's kennel, the warehouse collapsing, Rune's faint whine beneath the wreckage, Caleb's letters, a mother's voice from Montana asking if the gift still walked beneath the sun. He pulled. The bell rang. The sound was not beautiful in any polished way. It came out rough, hoarse, slightly cracked, carrying smoke and winter and old fire in its throat. But it was true. It moved over the roofs of Silverpine, across the snow-covered street, past Mabel's diner, over the church without its original voice, toward the old mining road and the burned hillside beyond. People stood still until the note faded. No one clapped. It was better that way. Grant looked above the forge door. Amos had mounted a new iron sign there, the letters dark and strong. Nothing broken beyond fire. Grant read it once, then again. Rune rose stiffly, came to his side, and leaned against his leg. Grant rested his hand on the dog's head. He did not promise himself he would be healed by spring. He did not promise never to wake in the dark, never to flinch at a hammer strike, never to feel the old road calling him away from everything that might need him. He only stood beside the people who had dug through snow with him. He stood beneath a bell that had burned and still had a voice. He stood with Caleb Hardy's words no longer a chain, but a light held somewhere behind him. And when Amos asked, "You staying through winter then?" Grant looked down at Rune. The dog's amber eyes lifted toward him, patient and knowing. Grant exhaled. "One more day," he said. Amos nodded, as if one day were a contract signed before gods. For a man who had once wanted to disappear, one more day was not small. It was an oath. Grant Ashby did not find healing in a perfect ending. He found it in one more honest day, one loyal dog, one old forge, and a town willing to dig through the cold with him. Sometimes grace does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes as a hand on your shoulder, a dog who refuses to move, a bell that still rings even after the fire. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about someone or some faithful animal who helped you keep going when life felt too heavy. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May your own broken places find warmth, patience, and the right hands to help them ring again.